Welcome back, students, to section 1.5, terminology for subtracting real numbers. So the term that we're going to use for the first number is the minuend. And the second number is going to be called the subtrahend. These are the numbers being subtracted. So I'm going to fill in these blanks. Minuend, again, is the first number. Subtrahend is the second number. Now the answer to the subtraction problem is called the difference. So 2, the minuend, subtracted by 6, the subtrahend, gives us the difference, which is our answer of -4. All right, so our subtraction sign is the same as a negative sign. And then the plus sign, of course, is the same as the positive sign. All right, so in our last section, we learned how to add numbers with same signs and different signs. Now we're going to look at how to subtract two numbers with same signs and different signs, and how the rules are pretty much the same with a slight little twist at the beginning of solving the problem. All right, so subtracting two numbers with different signs rules. Subtract the subtrahend, which is the second number, from the minuend, and keep the sign, the same sign, of the larger or the greater number. Okay, so example 1, we're going to have a couple of different examples, but this is the first one. Example 1 for subtracting numbers. A typical subtraction problem that you're most familiar with from elementary or grammar school would be something like 6 minus 2 equals 4. You're used to doing that kind of subtraction problem. So let's think about what that means. You gain 6 yards in the first play, then you lose 2 yards in the next play. So you have gained 4 yards total past the scrimmage line. You have moved closer to your goal line. So 6 minus 2 equals 4 is actually the same as 6 plus -2 equals 4. So remember, this is what we were doing in the last section, where we learned if they have different signs, we take the difference and keep the sign of the larger. That is the same as a typical subtraction problem. Now keep that in mind as we go through these examples. Example 2. Now we have 2 minus 6 equals -4. So let's think about that one. You gain 2 yards in the first play, then you lose 6 yards in the next play. You have lost 4 yards total behind that scrimmage line. You have moved farther from your goal line. So the new way of looking at it is 2 minus 6 is -4. But that is the same as what we did in the last section of 2 plus -6. Again, the rule for adding was you take the difference and keep the sign of the larger if they had different signs. So the difference between 6 and 2 is 4. The 6 is greater, so our answer is -4. That is the same as this problem right here. Well, what if we are subtracting two numbers with the same signs? Well, we're going to add those two numbers, the subtrahend and the minuend, and we're going to keep that sign. Keep the negative sign. Okay, so example 3, -2 minus 6 equals -8. So let's think about that problem. You lose 2 yards in the first play, then you lose 6 yards in the next play. You have lost 8 yards total behind that scrimmage line. You have moved farther from your goal line. So the negative 2 minus 6 equals negative 8 is the same as what we did in the last section. Negative 2 plus negative 6 equals negative 8. So remember when we were adding two numbers with the same sign, we did in fact add them and then we kept the sign. So negative 2 plus negative 6 is negative 8. Again, that's the same as negative 2 minus 6 equals negative 8. So let's move forward and we'll come back to that in just a minute and why they are the same. But let's just keep moving up. Okay, so subtracting a negative number. Remember in English grammar that a double negative is actually a positive. So let's think about that with this example sentence. I have not eaten. I did not include an extra not in there as a mistake. I wanted to show you a double negative in grammar. So I have not eaten means you have eaten. So the nots, because there's two of them, they cancel each other out and makes that sentence a positive. So a double negative in math is also a positive. They cancel each other out. Okay? So for example 1 in this particular section, 2 minus a negative 6 equals 8. So you gain 2 yards in the first play. Then you lose 6 yards. That's a double negative. So what that really meant was you gained 6 yards in that second play. You have gained 8 yards total past the scrimmage line. You have moved closer to your goal line. So let's look at the I have lost 6 yards. That really means you have gained 6 yards because that's a double negative. It cancels itself out. So 2 minus negative 6 equals 8 is the same as 2 plus 6 equals 8. Example 2. Well, what if we have negative 2 minus negative 6 equals 4? You lose 2 yards in the first play. Then you lose 6 yards, double negative, in the next play, which means you really gained 6 yards. You have gained a total of 4 yards total past the scrimmage line. You have moved closer to your goal line. I have lost 6 yards means you have gained 6 yards. So negative 2 minus negative 6 equals 4 is in fact the same as negative 2 plus 6 equals 4. So again, take the difference, keep the sign of the larger. So 4 is the difference, 6 was the larger number, so that's why it's a positive 4. But that is the same as this right here. Example 3. Negative 6 minus negative 2 equals negative 4. You lose 6 yards in the first play. Then you lose 2 yards. That's a double negative in the next play. You have lost 4 yards total behind the scrimmage line. You have moved farther from your goal line. So that I have lost 2 yards means you have really gained 2 yards. So this negative 6 minus negative 2 equals negative 4 is the same as negative 6 plus 2 equals negative 4. Negative 6 plus 2. Different signs, take the difference, that's the 4. The 6 is the greater number, that's the negative that goes with the 4. So this shows how both of these are in fact the same problem, even though they look different. One thing that I want to show you, I want to go back up here real quick. So just kind of scroll back to your original first example. And I want to show you how they are the same. We have what's called the keep, change. Okay. So these are to only be used with subtraction. Do not use these with addition. This is only to help you with subtraction. So 6 minus 2 equals 4. We're going to keep the 6. We're going to change the minus to plus, that plus 2 will become a negative 2, and the rest is going to stay the same. So keep, change, change. Now you'll see how these two are actually the same problem. Let's do the next one. Let's look at 2 minus 6. I'm going to keep, change, change. So keep the 2, change the subtraction to plus, negative 6. That is negative 4. So now you can see they are in fact the same problem. Let's do the next one. Keep, change, change. Negative 2 minus 6. We're going to keep the negative 2, change that to plus, change that to negative 6. That is in fact negative 8. And you again can see how they are the exact same problem. Well, what about these double negatives? Let's see if that happens as well. So the K, C, C. Keep, change, change. All right, so 2 minus negative 6. So I'm going to keep the 2, change the minus to a plus, change this negative 6 to a positive 6. Well, look at there, 2 plus 6 is 8. And we do have the same two problems here. Well, what about this one? Negative 2 minus negative 6. Keep, change, change. Keep the negative 2, change the subtraction to plus, change that negative 6 to positive 6, and we end up with 4. And we do in fact have the same problems. Now again, this is to only be used when you have subtraction. Do not use this with addition. It's very important. You'll just confuse yourself if you use it with addition. So this is only to be used with subtraction. All right, last one, negative 6 minus negative 2. Keep, change, change. All right, so keep the negative 6, change that to a plus, change that to a positive 2, and we end up with negative 4. And again, it just shows you that these are in fact the same problems. Now let's look at translating words and phrases. Now that we have our addition facts for positive and negatives and our subtraction facts for positive and negatives, or our rules, I should say. So our first one says 5 minus 13. That's what I'm going to write, 5 minus 13. I'm going to use our trick of keep, change, change. So keep the 5, change the minus to plus, change the 13 to a negative 13. These have two different signs, so that tells me I'm going to actually find the difference between the numbers, which is 8. The 13 is greater, and so our number is negative 8. Our next one says 7 less than negative 6 and 2. That less than, don't forget, is a turnaround phrase. So I know I'm going to have the minus 7 after what I'm about to write. Negative 6 and 2. So negative 6 plus 2. Because it said 7 is less than this. So that means that has to be solved before we subtract that 7. All right, so negative 6 plus 2, we're going to take the difference, which is 4. Keep the sign of the greater, which is the 6, so it's a negative 4. Negative 4 minus 7, because we're just going to bring down that minus 7. I'm going to use the keep, change, change. So I have negative 4 plus negative 7. So I changed it, and I changed it, and I kept that one. Negative 4 plus negative 7, they have the same sign, so I'm actually going to add them and keep the sign. So 4 plus 7 is 11, and keep that negative sign. So our answer is negative 11. All right, so we have 3 subtracted from 6 and negative 4. So again, we have a turnaround phrase, subtracted from. So I know that 3 is going to be after this next part. And it's going to be subtracted from 6 and negative 4. So that means 6 plus negative 4. And the minus 3 comes after we have solved that part because it's being subtracted from that sum. All right, so 6 plus negative 4. Those are two different signs, so I'm going to take the difference. Let's see, 6 minus 4 is 2. All right, so my 2 is positive because the 6 was greater. I forgot to say that. Now I have subtraction in here, so I'm going to keep, change. So 2 plus negative 3. Now I have two numbers with two different signs, so I know to take the difference, which is 1, and then take the sign of the greater number, which is the 3, so our answer is going to be negative 1. I've tried to give several examples of the different variations of the positives and the negatives in these notes. And then I'll give you more example problems that are more complicated in our practice video that will be next. So let's go through these and talk through these. 5 plus 6 is in fact 11. 2 minus 11 is the same as saying 2 plus negative 11. Remember, keep, change, okay? So the difference between 2 and negative 11 is 9. The 11 is greater, so that means our answer is going to be negative. Now let's look at the next one, 5 minus 6. That's the same as saying 5 plus negative 6, which is going to be negative 1. Now we're going to keep it, change again. So we have 2 plus 1, which is 3. Our next problem has negative 5 plus 6. We're going to take the difference because it's two different signs, which is 1. The 6 is greater, so that means it's a positive 1. I'm going to do keep it, change. So that's the same as 2 plus negative 1. 2 plus negative 1 is 1, and that 2 is greater, so it's a positive 1. Our next example has a lot of negatives, so let's think through this. This negative 5 here, if we do keep it, change, becomes negative 5 plus 6. So I'm going to have a 6 here. There are two different signs, so I'm going to take the difference, which is 1, and keep the sign of the larger, which is the 6, so it'll be a positive 1. I'm going to keep it, change it again. 2 plus a negative 1 is 1. The 2 is a positive, so our 1 is a positive. 5 plus 6 is 11. Nothing unusual about that. Then I have a negative 2 plus a negative 11 when I do my keep, change. That is going to give us a 13. That is negative 13. They are the same signs, so we add them and keep the sign. Now you'll notice in this one, I did not do keep, change here because that is addition. Remember, we only do that on subtraction. All right, so this one is going to be 5 plus a negative 6. The difference between that is a 1. The 6 is greater, so it's going to be a negative 1. I'm going to do keep, change again. So negative 2 plus a positive 1. Negative 2 plus 1. Two different signs, so I need to take the difference, which is 1. The 2 is greater, so my 1 is going to be negative. The next example has a negative 5 plus 6. Again, this is addition, so I'm not going to keep, change. We only do that when it's subtraction. But I have two different signs, so I need to subtract them, which is 1, and keep the sign of the greater, which is the 6, so it's going to be a positive 1. Now I'm going to go through the keep it, change, because we do have subtraction. So -2 plus -1. They are the same sign, so we're going to add them and keep the sign. So our answer is -3. Our last example with these particular types of problems, we have a lot of negatives in here. So let's go ahead and do our keep it, change, since this is subtraction. So we end up with -5 plus a +6. They're different signs, so we're going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger. So that's 1. The 6 is the larger, so we're going to have a +1. We need to do keep it, switch again. Or excuse me, keep it, change. So -2 plus -1. They have the same sign, so we're going to add them and keep the sign. Now let's look at ones with the absolute value. We have 5 plus 6, which is 11. That doesn't change. When we bring it out of that absolute value sign, we get 11. But you'll notice we had the subtraction sign on the outside. So that means we need to deal with the keep it, switch. Or excuse me, keep it, change. Keep wanting to use a different tip. All right, so 2 plus -11. They're different signs, so we need to take the difference, which is 9. The 11 is greater, so we're going to use the negative. So the answer to this is -9. All right, within this absolute value symbol, I'm going to keep, change. So that's going to be 5 plus -6. That is going to give us a 1. The 6 is greater, so it's a -1. Now, when I bring that out, I should say that gives us the absolute value of a -1. But when I bring that out of the absolute value, it changes it to a +1. So we have to be careful about that. I almost made a mistake. I need to do keep it, change for this one. So that becomes 2 plus a -1. And so the difference between that is 1. The 2 is greater. So we have a +1. Okay. All right, let's look at the next one. -5 plus 6. That's a 1. Bring it out, it's a +1. Keep it, change. So that's going to become 2 plus -1. Well, we know from the previous problem, that actually gives us a +1 as an answer. So even though these problems were slightly different, they ended up with the same answer because of the absolute value sign. Our next example, like above, has a lot of negatives, so let's be very careful. Let's do our keep it, change. So kept the -5, became a plus sign, and then the -6 becomes a +6. -5 plus 6 is 1. The 6 is positive, so we end up with a +1. That comes out as a +1. We're going to keep it, change, so that we can actually add them. 2 plus -1, that actually gives us 1. So these 3 problems gave us the same answer, even though they were written as different problems. All because of the absolute value and the positive negatives. All right, so let's look at the second row. We have 5 plus 6, which is 11. Bring that out here. I'm going to keep my -2, change that to a plus, and change that to a -11. So keep, change. That gives us -13 because we're going to add them and keep the sign since they're both the same sign. Keep, change. So we end up with 5 plus -6. That will give us a -1. Bring that out as a +1 since it's absolute value sign. This becomes -2 plus -1. Two signs that are same means we add them and keep the sign. So that's -3. All right, two more. This one has a -5 plus 6. We take the difference, keep the sign of the larger, which is the 6, so we have a +1. That comes out as a +1. I'm going to keep change. And we end up with the same situation that we had in the previous problem. So we're going to add them and keep the sign, so -3. Last one. I'm going to keep change. So -5 plus 6, that's going to give me a +1. Bring that out as a +1. Keep change. And again, I end up with -3 for our answer. All right, let's read our Bible verse. Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you. Deuteronomy 4:2. All right, see you in the next video for some practice problems on this section. Bye, guys.